break into that applause for a moment. Who would have thought that a man armed with summonses en route from Jerusalem to Damascus to there arrest any Jewish person who had converted to Christianity, who would have thought that as he was en route he would be knocked to the ground, blinded, and told, "Why are you persecuting me?" His answer was, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Who would have thought that this man, in his writings, you see, as a result of what happened, he became a follower of Jesus Christ and astounded those who were secretly converted to Christianity, who found out that he who was persecuting them was now going about saying that Jesus was the Messiah. Who could have thought that what he had written would have an impact on a man going through a similar experience 300 years later? You see, the man was named Augustine, and he was going through an agony in a garden in Milan. But before I go further, let me say something about him. He was born on the 13th of November in the year 354 in northern Africa. His father was an idolater with a violent disposition. His name was Patricius. He was married to a woman whose name you recognize, named Monica, who by her example and prudent conduct ultimately led her husband to baptism and conversion. They had several children, Augustine being the oldest, a brother named Navigius and a sister. Augustine was taught to pray by his mother, enrolled as a catechumen, but not baptized. The practice at that time was to put off baptism to a much later date because the rigors of what was demanded of those who was baptized was too severe. Much later in life, Augustine denounced the practice. As he grew older, he became involved in what we would call heresy, called Manichaeism. I won't digress about that, but it so offended his mother Monica that one day she put him out of the house and refused to allow him to eat at her table. Eventually she relented and allowed him back. In the year 370, at the age of 17, he went to Carthage to live a life of excessive loose living. He became involved with a woman, a concubine, until the year 385, becoming the father of a son named Deodatus. During these years of his teenage and then into the 20s, he was fascinated by rhetoric and grammar and became a professor of that art. He was impressed immensely by Cicero and Cicero's Latin writing. He did not know Greek, but he was fascinated by Plato and was involved in Plato's philosophy. He went to Rome, where he continued this luxurious, immoral living, followed by his mother, by the way, and then, in some way, hoping to escape her constant pressure about conversion to Christianity, he went to Milan, and there he encountered a famous bishop named Ambrose. He had heard a great deal about Ambrose as a highly capable speaker, someone who was very eloquent and had great learning and reputation. And he went to hear him speak, not much interested with the content of what Ambrose was saying. But all during this time, he was involved in what might be an intellectual struggle, because eventually, you see, he became an auditor, listening to what Ambrose had to say, not just the words, but the content. And he became ultimately aware that this which Ambrose was preaching was something that he should adopt and follow. It was Christianity, the very thing that his mother had been trying to influence him with. This went on until the year 385, when he wrote that he was bound by chains. An enemy was holding him who would not release him because he was a servant to immorality and licentiousness. He used to say he wanted to become a Christian, but he described himself as someone lazy and wanting to continue sleeping. I'll become a Christian one of these days. Oh yes, I will become chaste, but not now, later. He became influenced by the writings of St. Paul. He was interested in the epistles of St. Paul, and who would believe that what you heard as the second reading today at Mass was the thing that he heard in the garden in Milan? You see, he had retired there, struggling against conversion, and one day, in a fit of emotional turmoil, he retired to this garden with his friend Alypius, and there broke down in tears, falling to the ground and hugging himself and wondering how could he possibly break from this chain of immorality that was consuming him. He was determined to break free, but he was wallowing in sin and weeping at his own depravity. At the time that he was so weeping, he heard a child's voice from the neighboring garden, which in Latin said, "Tolle et lege," pick up and read. He heard it over and over again. He didn't know where the voice was coming from, but he decided that it must be in some ways divine. So he went and found a book open to the writings of St. Paul. The very thing that you heard today in the second reading of the Mass, what he opened the book to, told him to put aside licentiousness and immorality and put on Christ. It so overpowered him that he there made the decision to become a Christian, to become a Catholic. He went back to Ambrose, received instructions, and was baptized at Easter Vigil in the year 387 at the age of 33. He decided to return to Africa and to his hometown, to the delight and joy of his mother, and to practice there a kind of monastic existence. But before he could get to Africa, en route at Ostia, his mother died. When he stood by her bedside, she told him that everything that she had prayed for 28 years had now been achieved, and that he had become a Christian, and there was no longer a need for her to live, that all of the things that she had prayed for had been fulfilled. And she then did die after saying that to him. In 391, he was ordained a priest and assigned as an assistant to the Bishop of Hippo, a town in northern Africa. Eventually, he himself, in 395, was consecrated a bishop as the assistant to the then bishop of Hippo named Valerius. When Valerius died, Augustine was named Bishop of Hippo, and he became one of the outstanding defenders of the church against Manichaeism, Donatism, Pelagianism. I needn't digress in describing these heresies. He wrote 3 famous books, one called the Confession, the other, The City of God. He wrote that in 426. Another, which was called Retractionism, in which he rejected all of the terrible things that he had said and done up until that time. It was there that he wrote that beautiful passage that Elizabeth read to you, which I would repeat here if the book will open to the right place. Here it is. Much later in life, recognizing that how we had spent many years wasted and had finally found Jesus Christ, he wrote, "O eternal beauty, how late I have loved you." He was a man who had the experience similar to St. Paul's when he was knocked to the ground. That he, as a result of that experience in the garden in Milan, found that all of the things that he had sought, beauty, wisdom, truth, love, all of those he found in Jesus Christ. He found in Christianity. And that was such an overpowering experience, comparable to St. Paul, that the rest of his life was affected. It was almost like an electric shock that simply overwhelmed his entire being and made him ultimately a saint. I say to you, he was one of the greatest saints in our church. He lived until the year 430, right at the time that the Vandals were sieging his city. He incurred a fever, and he died on the 28th of August in the year 430. We celebrate his feast day on August 28th each year. But before he died, in the room where he was dying, he asked that tablets be placed on the wall all around his bed of the psalms, penitential psalms, that he would recite, telling God how sorry he was for the evil that he had done, and bemoaning the fact, as Elizabeth read, "O eternal beauty, how late I have loved you." That he saw in his 30 years of immoral living how his life had been wasted, and that had he, by the goodness of God, found him sooner, and he did seek God constantly. I could read just briefly to you. "I asked the sea and the deep and the living creeping things, and they answered, 'We are not your God. Seek above us.' I asked the moving air and the whole air with his inhabitants, and I am told, 'I am not God.' I asked the heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars, and they said, 'Nor are we the God whom you seek.' And I replied, 'To all the things which encompass the door of my flesh, you have told me of my God, that you are not he. Tell me something about him.' And they cried out with a loud voice, 'He made us.'" This is some of Augustine's magnificent writing, some of which was included in this concert tonight. I have been an admirer of and a student of Augustine for many years, actually tremendously impressed by his life. And